Yeah, all right. So let's start the RAC meeting. John, if you wouldn't mind doing the honors.
Okay, so we're started. I'm going to call the roll. Mike Leibowitz.
Here.
Mahalia Fernando. Not here. Cole Stout.
Here.
Jose Del Cid. Not here. Lucas Sabaski.
Here.
Brian Meyer.
Here.
Dina Passman.
Present. Present.
Mark Spradley.
Here.
Pat Sheehan.
Here.
Lavelle Walls.
Here.
Emma Wormser.
Here.
All right, you have a quorum. You have 9 of 11.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you everybody for attending our meeting tonight. My name is Mike Leibowitz. I am the relatively new chair. I succeeded from Brian Meyer, who's also still on the RAC, who did an excellent job, and I learned a lot from him. So the main thing I wanted to start off with is I want to welcome our newest members to the RAC, Dina, Mark, Lavelle, and Lucas. Please feel comfortable to jump right in. Don't feel like you need to, like sit there and kind of get the lay of the land. I highly encourage you to jump right in. If you have ideas or initiatives, let us know when we get to that part of the agenda. We have lots of opportunities to take leadership positions to the extent you have time and want to do that within the RAC. Again, always encouraged. When I first joined my first meeting of the RAC, I jumped in with a bunch of ideas and initiatives, and we ended up with our annual report, and a whole committee. So again, this is everyone's pretty amenable to whatever you want to do and encourage it. I know it sounds almost like camp or something weird like that, but if just so we can get to know you a little bit more, the new members, if each of you wouldn't mind, if you would please tell us just really briefly why you joined the RAC and really what your primary concerns or issues are, if you have any, or what you think you want to bring to the table. We can start with, I'm just looking at my screen. Mark, you want to start?
Thank you. I'm Mark Spradley. I live and work in Chevy Chase, Montgomery County, a block from the DC border. I usually ride the Red Line, 30, 32, 34 bus down Wisconsin Avenue. And just to give you a little context, my very first ride on Metro Rail was from Union Station to Farragut North, 1978.
Fearless leader disappeared for a second.
I'm back. Sorry, my phone cut out. I heard 1978.
Yeah.
All right, go. Okay, we'll move on. Sorry about that. My comms all got all messed up. Dina.
Hi, I'm Dina Passman. I live and work in Washington, D.C. I live in Mount Pleasant and have been here for almost 30 years. I ride mostly the green and yellow lines, the S buses, the H buses, the 42. And my day job is in public health, but I'm a big advocate for public transit, and my angle is making sure that it meets the needs of families and caregivers.
Great, thank you. Lucas.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lucas Sabaski. I live in Northeast DC in Eckington. I've lived here about 1.5 years so far, so relatively new. My home metro rail station is Noma Gallaudet, so I typically ride the Red Line, the P6 bus, and then the 90 and the 92. I don't know, I'm just excited to join the RAC because I think that Metro and everything Metro has to offer can just really help people. We can help bolster things for our neighbors. And I really think that Metro is like the engine that can make people successful in their personal or professional lives. So I just think that anything we can do to make it better, something I want to be a part of.
Thank you. Welcome. And Lavelle.
Thank you, Mike. Good evening, everyone. My name's Lavelle Walls. I'm a, you might say I'm a lifetime DMV resident other than going away to college. I live in Northeast Washington, a block from the Minnesota Avenue Metro Station. And I typically take the Orange Line, and I work for the district over about a block, really less than a half a block from the waterfront station. And echoing what Dina and Lucas said, you know, this is the best public transportation system in the country, and anything we can do to make it better, I'm for it. And that's why I ended up joining.
Well, thank you all so much for stepping up and joining the RAC. We are all very excited to have you, and that's not just words. Like, we're really excited to have you. You know, I envision all your backgrounds are amazing, so we're very excited about that. Again, I'm Mike. So I live in the Reston-Herndon area. I take the Silver Line from Reston to Federal Triangle every day, except for now when everything's all messed up. And I joined the RAC last year, mainly out of somewhat frustration with some of the things that was going on in the metro, and kind of how things I perceived it to be handling. And I wanted to, instead of just complaining about it, make a difference and, you know, kind of marshal like-minded people to kind of gather the information and tactfully convey that to the board and stakeholders, try to make our commutes and rides and the community at large a better place. And that's my motivation. If anybody else and the you know, kind of the longer time members want to kind of introduce yourself to the new members, so we all can kind of get to know each other really quickly, and then we can move on to the agenda to public comment. I can look at my list here. Brian, you want to say some hello?
I'd love to. I always take the opportunity to say something. Hello, everyone. My name is Brian Meyer. I'm a member of the Riders Advisory Council, and I have been since, I believe, the winter of 2021, early 2021. And I also previously spent about 2 years or so as chair until we recently had elections and we elected Mike. I absolutely love being a member of this body and representing the riders and advocating on behalf of them. And I wanted to welcome all the new members, and it's going to be a great journey. And I'm glad that you all can be part of these efforts to represent the riders and advocate for them to the board and to staff. So welcome.
And Mike, I'll go next. This is Pat Sheehan. I have been on the RAC since day one. I don't remember when that was. I think it was maybe 2010. So I've been through a lot of chairs and a lot of interesting times on the RAC. I actually am a I think I'm non-vote. No, I guess I can vote, I guess. Oh, I can't hold an office. That's what it is. I am actually chair of a sister organization called Accessibility Advisory Committee. And I am disabled, blind. And so I bring the disability perspective to the RAC. And it's kind of interesting. The RAC and the AAC do similar work. And so we try to complement each other when we can, particularly when we're talking before the board. And I'm very pleased to be working with Michael and Brian. And so we've got a good group here. Pleased to be with this group and pleased to have all these new members. So welcome aboard.
Thank you, Pat. Cole?
Thanks, Mike. Hi, everyone. My name is Cole Stout. I live and work in the Petworth neighborhood of DC. Apologies for I have my camera on. I'm in transit to another meeting, but I usually take the green and yellow lines down to work near the archives. Also a lot on the 70, 63, 79, sometimes over on 14th Street. I'll do like the 52s and 54 and S2 and S9 on 16th Street. I did a lot of transit work in college, even though it has nothing to do with my job. I think a lot of us here are all transit nerds, and just really pay attention to how riders interact with the system. And that was really the motivation for me to get on the rack about a year ago.
Thank you, Cole. Emma, do you want to say anything?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Wormser. I live in Navy Yard and primarily take the Green Line. I joined the RAC because nothing stresses me out more than attempting to drive in the city. And so I avoid it at all costs and rely really heavily on public transit, and wanted to just try to make it better if I could. So that's why I joined. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. And I think I didn't miss anybody, right? I should probably know that. I think we got everybody that's here. So assuming we did, again, welcome. Really appreciate everybody, all of you, not just the new people, everybody. And also appreciate John for all of his work and the kind of the behind the scenes to get everything organized as well. He is our go-to guy. So let's move on the agenda to public comment. John, if there's anybody from the public that's here and wants to speak, now is the time, and we're happy to hear from them.
If there's anybody who isn't on the rack and wants to take this opportunity to say anything, please just go ahead and use the raise hand feature in Teams. I only see one unfamiliar name, so I'm not going to single that person out, but.
Okay, going once, going twice. Okay, nobody from the public is want to speak. That is fine. So we have a guest today. The quarterly performance report, performance dashboard, something that we've been following for a while now. This is always something that also goes to the board. Where they look at the numbers as well. And Jordan Holt is the director, I think, performance improvement. And so we are going to hear from Jordan, and look forward to hearing that. So the floor is yours.
Awesome, thank you. So I'll share my screen here. I really appreciate you all having me to talk about our performance and get your feedback on some of the improvements that we're looking to make in terms of our reporting and the transparency. So this is the Q3 performance report. It tracks our performance for the first 9 months of our fiscal year, which runs from July of 2022 through March of 2023. You'll see this is kind of basically the same presentation that I gave to the full board last month. I'll add in a few updates in some places. And then at the end, I've added a bit of information to preview a dashboard that will be launching July 1st that will provide a bit more drill downs and customer relevant information on our performance. Sure, I'm clicking on the screen. All right, so in summary, customer satisfaction sustained the large improvements over the past 12 months. And we know that this is due in part to efforts that we've taken to improve service delivery. Ridership has been increasing and continues to increase. And again, we hear from customers that this is due to our service improvements. And then finally, we also know from our customers and our employees that safety is paramount. So we've been very much focused on addressing these concerns by adding more visibility in the system, kind of leveraging the cameras that we already have, as well as adding some particular a team focused on serving the needs of various customers in our system. This is both kind of a table of contents and a scorecard. So what I'll be giving a bit more detail about today are the measures over in the blue box on the left. And then I also have slides in this deck that you've received with some details on the measures on the right, but won't be delving into them in details unless you have questions. And the way to read this is we have a blue dot if we've met the target that we had set for that measure, an orange dot if we missed the target, a light orange dot if we missed the target, but not by much, and a gray dot for measures where we haven't set a target. And the reason we haven't set targets for these measures is generally because they're new to us. We don't have a long time series of data for which to base that target. So typically we like to have at least 12 months of data before we determine what an appropriate target would be. And then you see the right-hand column is whether results are trending in the right direction. So what this means is, are Q3 results better than we saw in Q2? Are they moving us closer to target? So you can see for some measures, we've missed target and things are not moving in the right direction. We see that for bus on-time performance, as well as over on the right-hand side for rail employee injuries. And so those are ones where, you know, the team at Metro is very focused on. You also see that for rail safety events and access safety events. Okay, so customer satisfaction, we've seen 11 to 9 percentage point gains over the last 12 months, which is huge. And we're kind of in the mid to upper 70s in terms of customer satisfaction for both rail and bus. And really Q3 kind of sustained this. We didn't see a big difference in satisfaction between Q2 and Q3, but we're taking that as good news. It didn't dip. So we've been sustaining these gains. And as I mentioned, we hear from customers, we know that this is largely driven by the service increases, particularly on rail, that we've been able to sustain. On bus, we've kept high service levels, we're able to return to the service levels that we offered before the pandemic a while ago. But what we hear from customers is that they've also noticed an improvement in the availability and accuracy of the real-time information that they're receiving. On Metro Access customer satisfaction, you'll see the results of 75% are on par with bus and rail, kind of right in between the bus and the rail results, but less than our target, which was aggressively set at 90%. When we set the target, it was last year around this time, so Q3, Q4 of fiscal year 22, and we weren't that far off from the highs of 90%, 91 and 92%, so we pushed ourselves. What we realized is that really a lot of the higher customer satisfaction that we saw in the months beginning in the pandemic were related to the suspension of shared rides on Metro Access. And once we reinstated that at the beginning of this fiscal year, we've seen satisfaction return closer to the levels that we had pre-pandemic. So those first 3 bars of fiscal year 20 over on the left-hand side of the graph. We'll go into this in more detail later, but maintained pretty high levels of on-time performance. And we also hear from our customers that overall, you know, they appreciate the courtesiness of our drivers, but that we can continue to drill down and focus on that. In terms of ridership, these are the graphs I love to see, a steady increase in ridership over the last 3 fiscal years. I am pleased to say that I think yesterday was actually beat. In the notes here, you see Tuesday, April 4th was our post-pandemic ridership record. I believe we beat that just yesterday. It was close. So that's good news. We do see, you know, some seasonal trends here. These dips are often kind of related to when Omicron happened or December, kind of the low point this fiscal year, but we've seen sustained increases. On Metro Access ridership, this is still below pre-pandemic levels, about 20% lower. And one of the things we know, there's kind of 2 factors here. One is that we have about 25% fewer registered customers today than before the pandemic. And in part, this is in October 2021, we started requiring customers to re-enroll. We stopped the automatic renewals and extensions of registration. And so we saw a month-over-month decline for the next 12 months. And as of since October 2022, it's kind of steadied out at around 36,000 registrants. What is not shown on this graph is that we are carrying more trips using our Ability to Ride program. This is a partnership we have with local taxis, sedans, van companies, TNCs like Uber, where we can, through a lottery, assign certain trips that have been booked on Metro Access to these providers. And so the percentage of trips that are being carried on Abilities Ride has been increasing and is now about 30%. On Metrobus, this is highlighting kind of what we all intuitively know, that frequency drives ridership. We implemented in September of 2021 a frequent service network where for a subset of routes, we run frequent service all week. And what we have really seen is customers have responded. I want to call your attention to on the left-hand graph, the blue line, because what that shows is that Sunday ridership on bus is above pre-pandemic levels. We have 13% of pre-pandemic ridership on bus on Sundays. And that's where Sundays had the lowest frequencies across the week pre-pandemic. So they've seen where we've added the most service, and I don't think coincidentally that's where we've seen the biggest ridership increases. On Silverline Phase 2, just an update there. The Silverline Phase 2 stations opened in November. This says over the first 5 months, we carried 1.1 million trips. I can now tell you over the first 6 months, we've carried 1.4 million trips. The rest of the patterns stay the same. So still we're seeing about a third start or end at Dulles and a quarter start or end at Ashburn, which is the terminal station. And that we still see kind of that a lot of the destinations are in downtown DC. So you're taking it down there. So the bigger dots here, the darker dots, are where we see more destinations for Silverline Phase 2 ridership. Also on the ridership side, I don't think it's a coincidence that we saw quite a few ridership records hit in March and April. That's when we saw a lot of cherry blossom tourism, almost 500,000 trips related to cherry blossom tourism during that period. We've also been seeing a steady, good clip of ridership to various events across the region. So Nats opening day, we had about 10,000 trips. Bruce Springsteen concert at Capital One Arena, 6,700 trips. Caps games also hit 7,000 trips. So that's something that, Metro continues to carry folks as they not just commute to work, but also attend various events across the region. Now on to on-time performance. So we'll start with Metro Rail on-time performance. First of all, I want to say that throughout the fiscal year, because we've been adding service, we added service 4 times just in that Q3 between January and March. That additional service has reduced wait times. So a full 20% or 70% of trips were faster in March compared to where they were in July. That has since increased because we've reopened the yellow line. So while we're at 90% of customers on time, during this period, kind of the on time has been redefined to be faster. Every time we add service, we kind of make our threshold of being, adjust our threshold for being on time. One, we know that kind of the top 4 reasons that customers aren't on time is one, MTPD, response to customer incidents. The second top reason is railcar malfunctions, often related to doors or brakes. The third being when we have a switch or a track circuit issue, and the fourth being track issues. On Metrobus, we saw, I want to highlight, we started the fiscal year strong, kind of close to our 78% target of buses on time, saw some dips in the fall, and then saw some strong increases beginning in Q3. So we have seen some improvements there. We're still falling short of target with about 77% of our bus stops delivered on time. You can see the breakout there of what that looks like by frequent service network. When buses aren't on time, they're more late than early, but we do have about 10% of buses arriving at stops early. Early is defined as 2 minutes, more than 2 minutes before the schedule, and late is defined as greater than 7 minutes after the scheduled time. On Metro Access, we saw also improvements in Q3 and are meeting our target of 92% of on-time pickups. The staff in our control center have really been focusing on this. So by addressing trips that are projected to be late, by assigning it to a taxi or another resource, also making sure that we have ample enough operators and reliable vehicles. Also want to call your attention to not only are more trips on time, but fewer trips are excessively late. So we decrease the rate of excessively late trips from 1.9% of trips in Q2 to only 1.5% in Q3. Moving on to bus prediction availability. So this is the percentage of our scheduled bus trips with real-time prediction data. So these are trips, the percentage of scheduled trips that will show up in your favorite app. So we've seen big improvements here over the course of the fiscal year, kind of starting at 92.7% in July, and by March having improved that by 3 percentage points to 95.7. This is equivalent to about, I think, 100 more trips a day in our real-time information. And the main ways we've achieved this are about, I think, about a third of the improvement. So 1 percentage point of that 3 percentage point improvement is related to fewer missed trips. And we've achieved that through, I think I'll get to it on the next slide, but by really recruiting, having major recruitment efforts for operators to make sure we're not missing any trip because of operator availability. The remaining 2/3 of that improvement, so those last 2 percentage points, is related to making sure that we're fixing any broken GPS units on the buses. So you can see here we've repaired 65 GPS units, and we have processes in place to monitor this. We've also been improving for our app, Bus ETA, the display of customer information here, kind of making the next bus easier to see by bolding it and adding some crowding icons so you can see how crowded that bus is. On bus missed trips, as I kind of already stole our thunder here, we've seen also a really large improvement over the course of the fiscal year there, having almost cut missed trips in half. We have 45% reduction in missed trips this fiscal year. And this was something we're very proud of because we've been outperforming our peers in the industry. They haven't been able to keep up as well as we have with recruitment. We were celebrating here a class that has 80 students. That was the largest. We've since beat that record and have 2 classes in a row that are 100 students each. So we've been really keeping up that clip. And in part, we're recruiting so much because that also helps us on the rail operator side. Many of our train operators come from bus. So we need to keep up that steady recruitment so we can also ensure we have enough train operators to add the additional service on rail. So on security, we are not meeting our target. So we are aiming for fewer than 6.5 Part 1 crimes for every million trips. You see that we've seen an increase in Q3. January, February, March are above that. And for the fiscal year, we're averaging 7.2. What you see in the graph below, that really a lot of this is driven by motor vehicle theft. Beginning in January, the number of thefts kind of tripled to quadrupled. And this is in part related to the Kia and Hyundai challenge from TikTok. We've seen a lot of those thefts in our parking lots, particularly in stations in Maryland. What we are doing about this, though, I mentioned that we have developed partnerships with local police forces, as well as a relationship with third-party security providers to provide more visibility of security force officers in our system. We've hired and onboarded 4 crisis intervention specialists. Their job is to be in the system and to help folks who are perhaps experiencing homelessness or need other support. Just in Q3, they interacted with 120 more people, and we're considering plans to hire 6 more. We've equipped all officers with no, I'm going to mispronounce this, naloxone. Thank you, which help prevent death from drug overdose. We continue to outreach with our Youth Advisory Council, and then specifically on the anti-theft, to address motor vehicle thefts. We've been purchasing and handing out the steering wheel locking devices at the stations where we've seen the largest increases. And the last measure I'll cover in this presentation is looking at our vertical transportation, which is our elevator availability and escalator availability. This is a really key part of our system to make sure it's accessible for all of our customers. We are meeting the targets that we've set for both of these measures. And I will say, when we count a unit as unavailable, it's because it's either unavailable for just an unplanned breakdown. That's the kind of green portion of the donut chart you see here, or because we've taken it out of service because we're doing replacement or rehabilitation work. For escalators, that's the main reason that units are out of service, is when we're doing the capital outages for rehab or replacement. And it's a little closer breakdown on the elevator side. But part of our strategy here to keep these units up and running for customers is to have an aggressive, regular rehab and replacement program. Finally, to preview a bit of the dashboard that we're working on and will launch July 1st, it will be available on WMATA.com. We'll have a data portal page that will have a link to this dashboard, as well as an existing ridership dashboard that we have. And what this is really intended to do is for kind of a handful or subset of performance measures that you see over here on the right, allow customers to drill in to information that may be more reflective of their own personal trips. So I have here an example for Metro Rail. So you'll be able to filter down not just to the line you take or the kind of time of day you travel, but also specifically to your origin station and destination station. So if you want to see your trips from Pentagon City to L'Enfant Plaza, and you want to even just see it for a particular day or for a particular week, you'll get some summary information here about what share of those trips were on time, how much of that service was delivered or conversely missed. And then you can kind of click on these buttons and see trends over a longer period of time. So that you can see kind of whether things are really getting better or getting worse for you, or how your trip is performing. And this will be similar drill downs and the same type of displays for these 4 measures for Metrobus, 2 measures for Metro Access, and then you'll also be able to drill into elevator and escalator availability at a particular station, as well as choosing the time frame that you want. Finally, also, we will have one more report to close out fiscal year 23. So that will be prepared in August and be presented to the board, perhaps the RAC, in September. And that will look at kind of the full 12 months of performance. Then starting in fiscal year 24, we're going to be, we'll continue with the quarterly performance reports as well as this dashboard. I think the quarterly performance reports allow us to go into a bit more detail about the whys of the different performance changes that we're seeing. But we're going to be renaming it to the Service Excellence Report to better align with our strategic plan and make sure that all the measures we're reporting on are the ones in our strategic plan and track towards our achievement of our goals and objectives there. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm very happy to answer any questions you have or delve into other measures.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate all of your insight and input. This is definitely the stuff that we need as a RAC to get informed, deliberation, get informed facts so that we can make recommendations to the board as appropriate. So I'm going to open it up to the RAC. I see Mark has his hand up. So let Mark ask you a question, and if Patrick has anything he can ask after Mark if he wants. But Mark, go first.
A great presentation. Thank you. My question is on the performance trend dashboard. What's your thinking behind not including safety information? For example, number of larcenies in the parking lot or assaults on the train.
Our intention is to add that in a subsequent phase. And the reason we didn't include it in phase 1 is there is already some information on Metro on WMATA.com about year-to-date and monthly number of crimes. And there's like a full blotter. So we were trying to do a phased approach to first start with kind of where there's less visibility over performance and then add that in. But it sounds like that's desired. Okay.
I would argue that most riders take a very personal view of safety, and it could actually boost ridership if, for example, you see the statistics in the aggregate on the WMATA website, but on your particular route, it could be 10% or less of that aggregate. So I think it's really information that riders would find useful. I mean, you have the option to maybe skip the bus, take the rail, or flip it and do the other alternative. So I would ask you to reconsider that.
Oh, Mike, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll get to Pat in a second. I just wanted to say to Mark, just for his edification, that part of our role as the RAC is, when we believe that there's something like a point where you made, which is, I thought it was a great point regarding the safety on the dashboard. That's the things where we can make our recommendations as the RAC so that people like Jordan and whoever else is the appropriate people can then say, okay, this is what the riders think, and they can take it into account and incorporate it as where that goes. So that's how this should work. So I personally really appreciate your comments and the passion that you brought into raising that and the fact-based of that. So on that note, Patrick.
Thank you. First of all, Jordan, great presentation as always. If I was a new RAC member, I would be impressed. You just always are spot on with your metrics. I missed something in the beginning. You were talking about Metro Access, and I think you were talking about, it was one of your initial slides. I don't know if you can go back to that. I think you said there were 36,000 participants with respect to Metro Access, and then you gave some other number, 30% or something like that. I just kind of missed that whole part. I don't know if you can go back and remember what you said.
Yeah, totally. Yep. It was, so you're right. I mentioned the 36 registrants on Metro Access. So that's kind of active.
36,000, right?
36,000 active customers. And then I mentioned, as a complement to the kind of Metro Access service delivered in Metro Access vehicles, Metro Access runs a lottery for the Abilities Ride program, which the registrants can opt into. And then a certain number of the trips that were booked via Metro Access can be fulfilled by partners in the local taxi, sedan, van companies, or TNCs, and that's Abilities Ride. And what I mentioned was that we're up to about 30% of trips booked on Metro Access are being fulfilled by Abilities Ride partners.
Okay. Oh, that was the piece that I missed. Very good. And then the other thing that they just started and they're piloting right now on the Metro Access is access to data, to real-time data, so
Oh,
that
great.
as a Metro Access rider, I can check very much like you could with Lyft or Uber where
Yep.
my ride's going to be. And right now, that looks like it's been pretty accurate. So I'm pretty pleased with that new development.
Awesome.
Oh,
That's great news. That was part
yeah.
of our strategic plan. In fact, I think I have a measure or something about accuracy in the plan of Metro
Oh.
Access real-time information. So it's something I'll have to start trying to measure.
Wow. Okay. Mr. Blake is collecting that information ad hoc, I think, but I'm very pleased with what I'm seeing on it, and it was kind of a surprise. Didn't realize it was coming this fast. So we'll be interested in looking at that going forward. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Pat. Brian?
Thank you so much, Jordan, for coming and speaking to us about WMATA performance. I think this is now maybe the fourth, fifth time you've come in front of us to talk about it. And I'm always learning new things and always trying to point, the positive, but also the areas of growth out. When you go to the slide about the Metro bus on-time performance, so it's awesome to hear that there's been a 45% reduction in missed trips, and that the 1.4% of scheduled bus service was missed is well below kind of industry standard. A question and maybe some editorial comments as well. The on-time bus performance is greater for bus routes that have longer headways, or like 20 minutes as opposed to 12. Do you know if there's any specific reason for that? And do you know if that is pretty consistently the trend, that the more frequent the bus route, the more likely that it will fall out of that 2 minutes early, 7 minutes late time frame?
I think a lot of this is, our more frequent routes are often on kind of the busier corridors, and maybe more prone to dealing with traffic and congestion that can lead to more lateness. So that's, I think, one of the reasons we see that on the 12-minute routes compared to the 20 minutes. We have 32 routes in our 12-minute frequent service network and 27 in the 20-minute network. So they're roughly the same in size, but that's, I believe, kind of more one of the reasons that we see that there.
That makes sense now that you think of it, and thank you for providing that. Two more comments. I will say, I know this really has nothing to do with performance, because you're more about collecting data and reporting on it than actually making some of the changes, but I think the development of the Better Bus Network and its implementation in some way, shape, or form by the board, obviously there's funding mechanisms and infrastructure that go along with all of this, but I think realistic expectations about on-time performance need to be a part of that. Because I think it would be very disingenuous of us as a system, or even us as an advisory council, to say, yeah, let's have all 12-minute service 24 hours and then not being able to deliver on that, or have more infrequent service or missed service rather. So I think we need to be very careful and strategic about what we as a system can reasonably do. And then obviously I've told you about this, and this is just a personal thing. I think we should get rid of the 2 minutes early kind of missed schedule. I think it should be 0 minutes, but that's just my personal opinion. But okay, I'll yield back to you, Mike.
Thank you, Brian. Lavelle?
Thank you, Mike. Great presentation, Jordan. I had a question on slide 17 with the security on the system. With local partners, I can say for the two stops that I frequent most, Minnesota Avenue down the street from me and waterfront where I get off to walk to my office. It's a welcome sight, and the people that I've talked to in the last week really do enjoy that. With the local partners, as far as the private security, what would be the factors to expand it to other stations?
Honestly, I am not sure about that. I know that since, honestly, the top bullet here is 70%. I believe that we have been trying to expand that. We're now at, I think, more like over 100% is the last I heard about last week. So we really have been trying to expand where those are. I know that the police are very data driven in their deployment, and so are looking constantly at where they are receiving the most calls and what trends they're finding there, and are using that to determine their deployment strategy. So I know that that's one of the ways they decide where to put these resources, but don't know specifically about kind of the overall how many resources are continued expansion plans beyond that we have expanded since March.
Okay, thank you, Jordan.
Okay, anybody else? Oh, Lucas.
Oh, Lucas, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I guess just first of all, I'd like to say, like, as a customer myself, I definitely think the customer satisfaction results are definitely in line with how I'm feeling. I feel like, especially over the time period that we covered in this report, things are definitely moving in the right direction. So thank you for that. But my question is more around the new performance dashboard. I was wondering kind of what your plans are for kind of socializing that in a more like public forum, specifically for people who might not have or do have like limited web or smartphone access. Do you have any plans to like put this in a more public setting, maybe at like a busy station, or advertise this where people can kind of look into it without access to their personal device? Just in case, maybe to build more confidence in people who typically wouldn't get to see this data elsewhere?
That's a great question, and those are great suggestions. And I will be honest and say we have not put we do not have a full plan about how to socialize it for people with limited access to kind of a computer or their mobile phones. We are trying to design it so it's mobile phone friendly, but that doesn't get at your point. We have some very initial conversations about what it could look like to leverage some of these new digital screens that are coming, that are being piloted at some stations to show performance information, but haven't gotten beyond those conversations. So I'd be really interested. I mean, you mentioned several ideas here, putting it on the screen, but if you have other ideas about how to get this information out there, would also be really open and interested in any ideas or thoughts you have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just think as long as many people as possible can maybe kind of get used to this, and I think that kind of just bolster the reliability and the confidence in the system more. So I think the more, the better.
Thank you, Lucas. And I'm frantically taking notes so that for some of the things that the RAC members are suggesting, so that we can kind of maybe put it in writing so that you know where we stand on things. Lucas is on there. Brian said some stuff, and then the safety part, I think that Mark had brought up earlier regarding the dashboard, which I thought were important. Does anybody else have anything? I have a couple questions. Okay. Lavelle had actually took one of my questions, so thank you, Lavelle, for that. A couple minor, just based on some of the facts of the slides. I know one of the slides referenced ATO, but my question is does ATO, is it still on track to be completed for the end of 2023 for all of the rail lines?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. I don't know if John or Jose know. I know we've been really working towards that goal and doing overnight testing and, have a big campaign to outreach to all of our operators to, get their feedback and understand their concerns. I believe we're still on track, but don't know for sure.
Okay, yeah, because I know from our own rack outreach, that was a big thing that came up pretty regularly, that ATO. And I know there's been kind of some information that it was only going to be the red line, then they said it was all the lines. So I think from a rider perspective, I'm confused. We're all confused of where that's going on that. Just because I saw it on the slide, I thought it was a question on that. My only other question is, maybe this is just user error on my part. I know I saw the slide regarding a weekend bus ridership. Where does weekend rail ridership stand compared to last year, previous years?
Yeah, so it is still, so in general, our weekend ridership has rebounded better than our weekday ridership. So I will say it is, actually, let me just quickly, if you bear with me, I think I can find that information pretty quickly. Got really big. Okay, so our, weekday, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. So weekday, we are about recovered over 50% of our weekday ridership. On weekends, we are carrying closer on Saturday, carrying a smaller portion of our riders, but I believe it is stronger. I'm trying to see if I can get the exact percentage of our weekend recovery. I can't, but I can get back to you on that. Oh no, here we go. Yes. Okay. Rail is percent of, oh no, that's how much service we're offering. Never mind.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
My only other question was going to be which rail lines kind of have, rebounded and, and where they stand. Is it like the core where people are taking the rail, or is it people from like Ashburn? Are they taking the train? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, generally we do see fewer, so it is more in the core stations that have recovered more of the ridership, less at the end of line stations, just because a lot of those were the more commute trips and people are just commuting less in general. So that was kind of our bread and butter ridership at the outer edge stations. So that's kind of as you were hypothesizing, those are the trends that we see.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, just because, I know like out in the suburbs, it's always kind of the reputation that, and forgive me for that being nothing flippant on it. The reputation is that Metro is worthless on the weekends. Like that's kind of what I know people take it, but that's kind of the common thought out here, I think. But thank you very much for
Yeah, I think in part a lot of it is on weekends. We do a lot of track work. So I know it's kind of like this idea of like, oh, you got to check to see if it's running or if the stations you want is open. But we do offer, we have, the one thing I can tell you is that like similar to bus where we've really upped our frequency over the weekend. Same thing with Saturday and Sunday. Like on Sundays, we're offering like 130% of the service level that we were offering pre-pandemic, because we've really aimed at trying to make sure it's frequent kind of during off-peak times too.
All right, great. Thank you so much. So on behalf of the RAC, we always appreciate you coming. I know you put so much work into what you're doing and everything like that. So I just really appreciate that. And it's really helpful, everything you've told us. It's something that I think is definitely food for thought that we want to, I think we all have the same goal of the RAC to get these things working in the way that I think you envision it. So yeah, I think I took some notes. These are things that I might want to put into writing just so for, your consideration and your
Great.
team. And anybody else have anything? Otherwise, we can let Jordan go. All right,
Yeah, I
great.
have a question. How frequently will we see reports like this?
Yeah, so we produce these detailed reports every quarter. So I'm happy to come and speak with you every quarter about them. The dashboard will update regularly. So if you're ever curious about like, has my trip been getting better? Or is it just my imagination? You'll be able to go to the dashboard and see it. But we produce these quarterly.
And I always enjoy watching you explain this at the board meetings, every month too, as well with seeing these things. So thank you, Jordan, so much for your time tonight to speak with us. We really appreciate it, all of us.
Thanks for your feedback too and your questions. It's important that the measures reflect customer experience. So I value your feedback on that.
Great, thanks. Okay, we are going to let Jordan go, and we're going to move on down the agenda. 1 hour down. Hopefully we can, I think these are going to start moving quicker. A couple things to talk about. So the next thing on the agenda is this. This is a new for some of the, like Emma and Brian, you probably haven't seen this yet. This is we're planning on something called the Rider Summit. And we're looking at, I'll give you a quick rundown of what we're looking at. We're looking at organizing a Rider Summit as part of our outreach effort and to potentially help educate about how transit affects riders in the context of the fiscal situation and, let's say, other relevant issues that are relevant to riders. The idea is to invite members of rider-centric groups and networks from throughout the region. One of them is called Metro Now, the youth committee that was brought up by Jordan earlier. There's neighborhood associations, of course, the AAC that Patrick is a big part of, and really members of the public to join us at a RAC meeting. We're looking at the fall, probably around October, to create something of an umbrella organization of riders. The goal is not to advocate, but to educate. And I know there's a fine line, but I think we can do it, to educate riders and these community organizations, as well as the board and relevant stakeholders. I envision this would include positives and negatives, including the financial issue that some of you may not be aware of, but you're going to hear about this a lot, and really how it will affect riders. At the last board meeting, I'll give you an example. The AAC and individual members were encouraged by the board to do kind of do this on their own, educate regional leaders and organizations on their own. And I watched that happen, and it was kind of a little jokey, to be honest, when they were kind of talking to the AAC member. But and Mark, I see your hands up. I'll get to you in a second. I just want to kind of give my spiel on this. But if riders want to educate the wider community and be relevant in these discussions, I think it makes sense for all of these disparate rider networks, neighborhood associations that all have a stake in all this stuff, and organizations to really to organize and to collaborate, so we're pulling in the same direction. That way you don't have AAC members individually doing one thing, RAC members doing something else, youth committee doing whatever, and like in their lane. So it's really to create one lane that we all can kind of go into and collaborate together. And I think this unity will bring greater voice to what we are trying to achieve. So I think just that's kind of a big spiel that the first step is to really identify and contact these groups. Kind of made a couple of contacts at WMATA to kind of get some of the contact information for some of these groups. Obviously, we have AAC contacts. We just look and talk to Pat, but a lot of this work and planning can be done, I think, outside of meetings, via email and things like that, and other communications, so that nobody is overwhelmed with kind of this volunteer work. I'm going to beat that to everybody as well as volunteer work. But saying that, I wanted to gauge to see if there's anyone who wants to take the lead, really in planning this Rider Summit and kind of doing some of the contacts. I know, to be honest, Mark's name has popped up and talking about some of this stuff. His hand is up here too. So, I would be happy to give him first crack. I'm sorry to call you out, and feel free to say no or ask further questions. But I guess your name came up because my understanding is that you are particularly experienced at networking. That's why I called you out. But again, as always, shut me down if you want to. But that's kind of what the Rider Summit in a nutshell is envisioned. And I do see Mark's hand is up, so I will let you weigh in. And then Brian after that.
It gives me the impression that you're going to be drinking from a fire hose. My suggestion would be to do it incrementally, and then maybe after you meet with a few groups to have a larger group and build so that at least you know you have a way to collect the data. Otherwise, it's going to be a monologue. And I can promise you, if you don't allow people a chance to have a give and take, you're not going to have a reasonable attendance. The only way people are going to come out is if they can voice their opinion. So I think you have to build with maybe a survey and some online or virtual participation before you have this unruly event. I mean, unless you have a model where you've seen this work someplace else, I, again, would say it's going to be difficult to manage with volunteers.
That's really good and enlightening points. How I envisioned it was we have our annual report, which kind of put the left and the right of what the riders through our own outreach had informed us were their top concerns.
Right, but tell me the number of people that participated in that report.
And that's exactly it. It was just touch over 100.
Exactly.
It was definitely not scientific.
Now,
it was
fill the first 3 levels of Capital One and just imagine yourself behind the microphone.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah, can I jump in? Mike, can I jump in?
Yeah, please.
I apologize. I'm in transit between 2 events. So I have seen this work done. It is not intended for a monologue, and it's not intended for 1,000 people. I do think it's intended for influencers, and everyone around this table is connected to a handful of influencers.
I think she dropped.
Brianna, did we lose you?
Did we lose Brenna?
Okay, let's wait, she's back, I think. Brianna, are you back? I think she's having comms trouble, obviously. Why don't we move on to other people have their hands up, and then we will make sure that we get Brianna back. Brianna, you're breaking up. All right, let's go to Dina.
Hi, I appreciate the perspective.
I think Brianna doesn't know that we.
I also believe that there are ways to do this successfully. First of all, there doesn't have to just be one room. There's information that can be gathered. There can be engagement that is done beforehand. I think it's important to have everyone in the room or rooms.
So just give me an idea. Okay, it's happening tomorrow. Where is it? Where's this?
So Mark, can you guys hear me?
Now
we can hear you now. Yes.
So let me give you a scenario of a similar scenario. I think Dina has noted this, but I think the space, again, what I was saying earlier, I don't think it's intended for 1,000 people. I think it's an influencer group. Maybe it's 100, or just a few more than that. But the idea would be that it's not a monologue. It's actually a set of tabletop conversations facilitated using the same facilitator guide that we would develop collectively. And the RAC members could be
she cut off, but I guess my concern is this. This would be representative of the general public. It's not like it's a group that's cohesive, that knows each other, that has, the key word is social trust. That's the only way you can make this work if there's social trust. So if you can't control access and participation, it's going to be very messy because, first of all, we know 25% of the people who ride the system don't pay. We also know people smoke. We also know people carry guns. What are you going to do in the event that this becomes a typical day on the red line?
So my
Right,
view,
Michael?
yeah, let Pat talk. Go on,
Yeah,
Pat.
thank you, Michael. So I think, first of all, I like the idea. I think it's good. I'd like to hear more about what Brian has to say about how logistically it could be used. Michael, you mentioned a lot of other community-based organizations that are transit enthusiasts and would be interested in doing something like this. I think one thing I think we can all agree on is that we have a $750 million shortfall coming up this year, which we need to help solve. And so that is a common goal, a common purpose. If we all like this system, we need to fight for it. So one of the outcomes that we can get coming from this meeting is a series of talking points. And if you've got 15, I don't know, 20 organizations or whatever, then and they're all saying the same things with
Yeah,
respect to
I don't think it's
access.
the general. I
Oh.
don't think it's the general ridership, Mark.
All right, go ahead, Pat.
Thanks. Okay. And so that if you end up with a series of talking points, particularly with these groups that are out there who are transit enthusiasts, they're going to come and lobby to the people that we need to lobby them for. But I think, so that you have a focus to the meeting, the RAC, and certainly I think AAC could help, is we want to focus on maybe 3 or 4 key points and then develop our messaging around those points so that as we go out with the group, we have good talking points. So I think it's a good idea.
And Pat, I
Well,
would say that.
more than an
Hang on a second,
idea,
Mark.
let me just respond to that. We're not talking about an idea. We're talking about the implementation to actually have this event. So I'm not questioning the idea. I'm talking about the logistics. And just to give you an example, years ago, someone decided that the red line would go from Fort Totten to Farragut North. Other people built that system and somebody operated the train, opened the doors. So the logistics is what makes an idea successful. So we're not talking about the idea. Of course, you want to talk to riders, you want to survey riders. I'm talking about the logistics when you're a small group of volunteers.
Yeah, so I think, and Dina brought up, I think in the comments, some ideas for logistics. Bryna has her hand up. Let's give her a shot again, see if she has good comms. I'd like to hear what she has to say.
Sorry, I apologize, you guys. I don't have good connectivity tonight. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, so Mark, thank you for your. I agree. It's important to have good implementation. This is the very first conversation we're having on it. So from your experience that an idea to be implemented has a lot of steps in between. So, if the rider advisory committee agrees it's a good idea, the next step will be that Mike and I will work with John on identifying space. There are a lot of space options. That's not going to be a problem. We will identify, whoever the small group of people on the RAC, if there's 1 or 2, and maybe there's 1 or 2 on the AAC, we will make a small committee. We will run a show and an agenda and an action plan to implement it, a communication strategy and an invitation list that will be very targeted and intentional to make sure we get the right people in the room, not everyone in the room, and that we would create a facilitator guide. We would train up our facilitators, which would be members of the RAC and the AAC leaders, to be at the table to facilitate small group conversations in real time so everyone gets a chance to talk. And then we would have some sort of harvest time with that. And then the RAC would take and the AAC would bring it back together to roll it up into some next steps and bring that to the board. So that's my vision. And having executed hundreds of these myself, it's very doable in the amount of time you're talking about. So I'm not as concerned about that, but I've done it. And so I don't know if that helps everyone, but that's kind of, I think
it's not helpful because it's not a real example. And again, we're talking about ideas. And in Ukraine right now, the idea is that they're going to have a counteroffensive. The logistics will determine that counteroffensive. So you have to be as specific as possible. You cannot do this if you're just going to throw out an idea and say, we can manage this. You have to be very specific. I want to know the room. I want to know, how many people you're going to invite, how many people you expect will accept the invitation, what percentage of those people will actually show up, what percentage will participate, on and on. Here's how I'll sum it up. How do you eat an elephant? Just like you eat an apple, one bite at a time. This is a good idea if you start off in a managed, predictable way with one group, and then add 2, 3, 4, but just deciding that you're going to have a big writers forum or gathering, to me, it's logistically challenging.
Thank you, Mark. I definitely appreciate your passion and your insight based on your experience. So I want to hear, I know Dina's, she has some ideas. I'd like to hear what she has to say, and then Brian, and then we can all roll it up. So we're not talking all night about this. I understand where your position is. It makes sense to me. I think Brian had made some points. I want to hear what Dina and Brian have to say. Dina, please go ahead.
Of course, now I forgot my specific point, other than to say that it sounds like we're at the very initial phases here, and that there's a lot of things that have not been decided. So whether it would be in person, whether it would be online, whether it would be hybrid, what are the different organizations we're trying to involve, what are the goals? I mean, all of that needs to be formulated, and then I think we will have a much better idea of how to move forward.
Brian, go ahead.
Well, let me just add something else. The issue over trying to identify $750 million is a very critical issue. I live in Montgomery County, and I've been in the meetings, of course, where it's a question of allocating more resources to, free and reduced meal in schools, or allocating more resources to public transportation, whether it's our own Montgomery County system or WMATA. So my question is, where do you think this $750 million is? And
so let's not the point for right now. We're not going to talk about that right now because, as Dina mentioned, we're at the initial stages. And to jump off before we get to Brian, what Dina was saying, look, I've had almost 20 years military experience as well as my civilian government job. I mean, if we're going to do this, we're going to do a lot of this offline, get our ducks in a row. We're going to put together, the military as an op order, an action plan to really to get the left and the right of what we're doing, what are the issues, what are the talking points, get the logistics down, because as you talked about logistics in Ukraine, I mean, again, 20 years, I'm a lieutenant colonel in the Army. I know logistics is what wins and loses wars. I totally understand that. So, but the first thing we need to do is, again, op order battle plan that we can work on offline, so we don't have to go back and forth on this. But Mark, for right now, I get what you're saying, but let's hear from Brian.
So, thank you, Mike. And I think this is a very vibrant conversation and very useful. Is the goal at this meeting to try to create a smaller group within the RAC, like we did with the annual report, to investigate these topics a little bit more thoroughly? Or, yeah, I guess that's my question. And, or is this like something that we need to like vote on to agree?
So I think the way to go is I think we should create a committee of, or at least a chair or a leader, that's someone who's going to kind of drive the process, that can really collaborate internally with just the RAC for right now, as we kind of, figure out what we want to do to create the battle plan, right, or the action. So like, okay, it's kind of to Mark's point. How are we going to do this? Who are we going to contact? What are the steps? So if the first steps are, who do we want to involve? How do we want to involve them? How do we want to collaborate with these other groups? What do we want to focus on? How much in the weeds? What's the goal, right? Is the goal, it's not to advocate, but to educate. So like, and I think the goal would be, we could say, okay, from the rider perspective, from all these groups, what I suspect that most of them would say is that they have concerns for the long-term health and fiscal stability of the system. The idea is not to say, okay, here's how we're going to come up with $750 million, whatever it is, right? The idea is to stick in our lane as riders, how it will affect us. What can we, and educate the wider community of how this affects us, what are our recommendations. Then we can kind of just figure out how far in the weeds we want and it's appropriate for us to go. So what I propose is that perhaps what we do tonight is that we identify, and maybe it's me, maybe it's you, maybe I don't know. I think based on the conversation, I think Dina, I think she might have some ideas and her experience as well. Again, I'm not calling anyone more out, because you see how that didn't go well for me last time. But I think for the initial phase of offline, so we're not just spinning our wheels here, to come up with the plan, and we can do that, starting as soon as people are available, and then incrementally branch out. I think that was part of Mark's point, before we officially contact, Metro Now and stuff like that. But we can get the contact information. Doesn't mean we have to contact everyone right now. I think that we definitely should have Pat, if he's willing to kind of at least be involved in our commentary. But I think someone should take the initiative to kind of get us to that battle plan. And John has his hand up. John, go ahead.
Sure. If I could make a suggestion, and I see a couple of people have dropped in the chat about Robert's Rules of Order, so that sort of led me to thinking that it may be helpful at this very early juncture in this process, I guess, to decide as a group, whether or not this is something that you want to pursue. And then, and if that's the case, vote to establish a committee or a working group or whatever you want to call it, to then, maybe workshop some things, to then come back to the group to get feedback on moving forward. So those seem like sort of two concrete actions that we can take tonight to, or that you all can take tonight. I don't have a vote in this.
Okay,
to decide if that's something that y'all want to move forward with.
No, I agree, John. I think that's good. So let's, why don't we just take a vote, see what everybody thinks. If we think, so I propose that we as a RAC vote to continue discussion and pursue this Rider Summit initiative, and to continue the process of moving forward with that, just at the very basic level. Do I have a second? Dina,
Second.
I second, Michael.
Okay, all in favor. John, do you want to do the roll call on this one?
Could it be easy to raise hands? Would it be easy to raise hands and just count from there?
Some people aren't on video.
That's true. You know what? I'm just gonna call out people's names because some people aren't on video, and
that's good, John.
Yeah,
And some
let's do
people,
it.
like Pat, you still have your hand raised, and I just don't want
Oh.
to conflate anything.
That's where I was going with that.
Oh, sorry about that, John. Sorry about that. I didn't see the hand.
No, we're good. We're good. All right. So we have a motion on the floor to, I guess, move forward with holding a rider summit. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
That's accurate, yes.
It's been moved. It's been seconded. All right. I'm just going to go down the list of those in favor. Mike.
Yes.
Mahaley is not here. Cole, are you still with us?
I think
No.
you had a drop off.
Jose is not here. Lucas.
Yes.
Okay. Brian.
Yes.
Dina.
Aye.
Mark.
Yes.
Okay. Pat.
Yes.
Lavelle.
Yes.
Emma.
Yes.
Okay. All right. It was unanimous. That was
Okay.
okay. So you've
And
all
so-
voted to.
John
Sorry.
Go ahead.
or Michael,
Yeah, please.
I'd like to be able to take this back now that BRAC has agreed to work on this. Take it back to the AAC, and perhaps it is something, as you said, Michael, that AAC and RAC could jointly sponsor. I think it would be good.
Yeah, look, just from my observations of the AAC over the last year, I can attest that the AAC has an amazing network of very dedicated and devoted people. Pat included in that group, but there's others as well that are really good at what they do. So absolutely, Pat, and I think that's where the next vote would be, to establish the Rider Summit Committee, and that's where, to make it more seamless and productive, that's where then that committee would then work directly with however the AAC wants to interact directly with the RAC. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. Yeah, I'll take it back.
Okay, let's vote to John, if you think this is the way to go. And I am an amateur. I freely admit it. The best way to set up, vote for a committee, or do we need one since we already?
I think that if there's agreement in principle from the group to hold this event, I think having a committee can sort of, I don't know that you need to vote on it. I think it can sort of fall under the rubric of, this is one of those things that you need to do to hold the event.
All right, so does anybody want to lead this committee, or at least kind of take the initiative, kind of send the initial, I think the two main beginning things would be to kind of really start developing the plan, and the second one would be to really get into contact with the AAC, whoever Patrick, recommends, kind of, so that way you kind of have a direct interface with that. Because I think that working with the AAC is vital, and I think it's very going to be helpful as well. And I think that's kind of where I think on that. Does anybody want to or want to nominate somebody for kind of that role? And I can do it as well if we need to, but I know my limitations on certain things.
Well, then I would place your name in nomination to chair it.
Okay, we have a second. Does anybody else nominate anybody else? Brian has her hand up, I think. Go ahead, Brian.
I don't think I have nominating authority here. So I was just gonna say that Mike, I think is leading all of the RAC. So it would be great if we could have someone else kind of step into that role. Otherwise, I just would encourage that if someone else has the bandwidth.
And there's RAC precedent for that. For example, when we created the annual report committee, Brian stayed off of the committee, and then I chaired that, and I think it worked out really well, and we had the good interaction. So I think Brian definitely makes a lot of sense. But thank you, Mark, and I will do it until we find somebody, if that's what it takes. So anybody else? I personally thought Dina had some stuff, but I don't know what your bandwidth is and stuff like that, and I do not want to be presumptuous of what you do and do not.
Yeah, I'm very interested. My bandwidth is really limited right now, but I will help to the extent that I can.
How about we do this? How about we work together? We'll pass some emails along, offline, and then include people, get Pat in there, then we'll kind of go from there. Does that sound good?
And guys, I am happy to work with the committee. So from that regard, happy to join you guys.
Okay, so I think we have a good start. This was a spirited and good discussion. Mark, I particularly want to single you out for your knowledge, and I think you really did a good job of kind of orienting us for how we want to at least consider the process moving forward. So I appreciate that a lot. So on that note, Dina, you and I will be in touch. We're going to include Bryna in that, and Pat, and then we will move forward as appropriate. Sound good?
Will do. Yes.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, I'm going to skip through my note to, we are now moving on to my favorite committee, the annual report committee update. So for those of you who are new to the RAC, the annual report was we did the first one ever for the RAC. We submitted it in April of this year to the board. The annual report was a big step in reasserting the RAC's relevance to the board and I believe to the community. It provides the RAC with a platform for directly conveying issues and concerns from the riders and proposing solutions and recommendations. When I first proposed the annual report, it was based solely on my reading of the bylaws and what the RAC's primary mission is pursuant to the bylaws and its founding documents. And out of that came the annual report. The 2023, again, what I said, 2023 report was the first effort. I think it was more of a starting point for where the potential there is to go. I think there's a lot more we can do with it. I think we can reach out. We'll be starting earlier this time. We can reach out to more riders. I don't think it's ever meant to be scientific, but I think it's still valuable because what we found was we had RAC members in the committee speaking with riders from across the transit zone, including buses, rail, metro access, and all from Maryland, DC, Virginia, everything like that. And we actually did pinpoint some very unified trends and beliefs from across the transit zone, and the same thing with the solutions. So I think it was helpful. So we need to start gearing up for the next annual report committee so that they can start gathering information from riders across, again, the transit zone regarding, again, and what we wrote up for the annual report is that its focus is the top 3 concerns and their proposed solutions to address those concerns. That's it. The committee process is made up of 2 main phases. The first is the information gathering phase, and then there's the report drafting phase. The timing would be to finish the report and submit it to the board around March of 2024, so that ideally, so we can include some fiscal recommendations and whatever comes out of the Riders Summit. I think there probably could be some natural synergy between that. The good news is that everyone on the RAC can join the committee if they want to. Last time many did, some didn't, and it was fine. It worked out okay. But we need at least 4 or 5 RAC members plus a chair to really get the committee running at some logical level. So we will need it. Going back to this, beating this one again, we will need a chair for the annual report committee, and then RAC members who want to join it. We're not going to do that today. I suggest that RAC members think about whether they want to chair the committee and whether they want to be on the committee and join it, however they want to do that. And we then can nominate and vote on the chair and members in our next meeting in July. So that's kind of where we stand with the annual report. Normally I don't talk that much on it, but I think because we have some new members, I wanted to I'm reading the comments as well. I wanted to make sure that we get kind of the lay of the land for everything the RAC has going on. So Pat, your hand is up. I don't know if that's from before or you have something to say. If you want to talk, go ahead. Otherwise, but Pat, do you have anything to say?
No, I meant to take that down. I'll give the Metro Access portion of to the report.
Thank you. And that was really helpful last time too, to have and again, talking about Metro Access or the AAC, they really came through with us to include their concerns in the annual report. I got a whole list of things from them that we included in there. I mean, no need to respond unless you have it. Does anybody have anything they want to say for right now regarding the annual report committee? Otherwise, we can move on.
Well, I read last year's annual report and I thought it was very informative. And I would say years after all of us are no longer serving on RAC, those annual reports will still be a valuable resource. So time and effort should be given to making it more robust and trying to incorporate more voices.
Yes, I 100% agree with you. I'm not a big excuse person. When we started the annual report committee, we were low on RAC members, and we kind of started a little late. And that's on me. That's my fault. So that was definitely, from my end, the whole process was a learning experience. But I completely agree with you. I see the positives and also the need for improvement in certain areas. So yes, thank you. Anybody else? Lavelle.
I'll volunteer to be on a committee, either data gathering or writing, either one.
Perfect. Let's remember that for the next meeting. In case you're not here in the July meeting, which we'll talk about the July meeting in a second, then I will make a note that Lavelle is in for something on the committee. And thank you in advance. Let's get our membership in the next meeting though, just so we can sake of time and so that people can think about how they want to do on that. So thanks to everybody. Okay. I'm going to move on unless there's anybody else. Hearing none of that. Now we're going to the outreach member report out. This is also a new, relatively new, we had it last month as well, new part of our RAC agenda. And I think this might be one of the most important ones we do beyond kind of the other bigger picture things like the Writers Summit and the annual report. So this one initiative is to essentially be the canary in the coal mine, where RAC members conduct outreach every month across the transit zone. And this could be whether you're riding or commuting or just among people you know at work or whoever just to see if there are any trends or issues affecting riders so that we can bring those issues to the attention of the board and staff. That's why I call it the canary in the coal mine. It's kind of because sometimes these things fester and then all of a sudden everyone's just really upset about it. And I think this is our way of kind of identifying trends, again, from across the transit zone. So I have two things we'll talk about. One of them is from Mahalia, who's not here tonight. She's a vice chair of the organization. She brought up a good one last month and she's on a roll. So I'm just going to read what she had sent to me to bring to the group. Recent incidents of people getting on the train track. She says she was on the Green Line on May 27th, early evening, and there was an announcement about delays because of someone who got on the track. She believes it was George Avenue, Petworth. She also knows somebody else who caught a guy on video at L'Enfant jumping onto the track to pick up coins he had dropped. She says she's not sure if these are isolated incidents or this happens more frequently than we think. I will say that I'm aware that I think there was another person on the tracks incident just today going on. And I know, and I know when the chief of transit police was here a few months ago to talk to us as we were preparing our annual report, I asked this exact question about the people on the tracks. And I asked if there was a zero tolerance policy, because there are people last year who were making TikToks on the tracks and a lot of weird things like that. And I have a national security background. So whenever I hear people on the tracks, my mind goes to places like sabotage and people doing and a lot of things like that. And I know there's also other things like people get electrocuted or get hit by trains or just get hurt. But I mean, my mind goes to places where I think there definitely should be zero tolerance because you have people screwing around in the tracks. You can't differentiate between people screwing around and people pretending to screw around where they're really up to something more nefarious. Again, and so that's kind of my spiel on Mahalia's concern. Does anybody else want to discuss or have anything else. I mean, I guess I'm trying to think of a recommendation or a solution. And the main thing is to, I guess the main thing, and Mark will get to you, is that I think we might need to reiterate to the transit police and to the board that they need to make it clear that there's zero tolerance and really start going after anybody that's on the tracks for any reason. And obviously you take into account things like mental health and stuff, but I mean, beyond that, I think we really need to, that's kind of my recommendation. And I think Mark, you had your literal hand up.
Thank you. I would say from the first trip that I took on the red line to yesterday on the blue line to Foggy Bottom, the first point of contact has not changed for riders. The first point of contact for riders in the Metro Rail system is the station manager. Of course, on the bus, it's the bus driver. So I would argue that it would be very informative to survey the 97 station managers and use their data to maybe do a wider or a narrower survey, depending on what those data points are.
So what would the survey, would that be a more of a wide-ranging survey about?
Well, you have to, in order to analyze the data, you're going to have to, make it like a Likert or something, and limit it to probably 6 or 8 questions just to be able to make sense of the responses. But we know the priorities for most riders: safety, reliability, cleanliness, on and just solicit their response, because there's nobody else in the system who's talking to more riders than station managers.
Can you type something up for me? I think this is a great idea to survey the station managers with a very focused list of questions. I think it goes beyond what we were just talking about with the people on the tracks, but I think I get your point.
Well, let me just say, I learned something new. I was on the elevator because the escalator was broken, and I had a suitcase, and I held the door for the station manager. And she said, "I can't ride the elevator when I'm on duty." And I said, "Why?" She said, "What if I get stuck? Who's going to get me out?" I mean, it's just like,
yeah.
Let's
look further into this. I think this is a good recommendation to the staff to kind of poll their station managers anonymously, probably to maybe not, I don't know, to see like what their thoughts are, since you're right about a lot of that stuff. So okay, I'm making a note of that one.
Well, if RAC does it, it's anonymous. And I think that's very important to get honest feedback. If the staff does it, you're not going to get the same type of quality responses because people fear reprisal.
I guess the question is, what's the goal then? Like, what do you want to get from?
The goal is to hear from riders. And, again, based on what I see, the station manager talks to more riders on a daily basis than anybody else.
Okay.
And so there's a disconnect between between the intention of gathering the information and actually getting riders to participate. You can't continue with 100 people responding to a system-wide survey and expect that to be reliable data points moving forward. So we have to try to figure out a way to get more people to be responsive. So I look at the station manager as being that interlocker.
Perfect, thank you. And on the other point, just so I can close the loop on Mahalia's, so just my recommendation would be regarding just the people on the tracks, solely that, not to get into the bigger thing that Mark's talking about, is I recommend, I think we should recommend that they reiterate the zero tolerance that the chief had told us a few months ago, and let people know that and abide by that. Again, going back to the people on the tracks. That's my thoughts. Anybody else have anything they want to talk about, either to Mark's point or to Mahalia's people on the tracks? Lavelle.
I put my hand down. I raised it, but I lost my train of thought because I
That
think
happens
when
all
Mark
the
was
time.
talking, I have it back. So if you're going to poll the station manager, how do you know whether they capture that type of data? Maybe it'd be a good idea to find out what they capture first. And if they capture it, fine. If they don't capture it, maybe recommend it.
That's part of building the instrument, of course.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understood where you're coming from. Okay.
Thanks, Lavelle. Lucas.
We're not asking them to validate our assumptions. We're trying to gather raw data, analyze it, and see whether or not there are any trends that reflect the rider experience.
As somebody who works with data and doing what you're talking about doing, you need to find out what's available first and then go from there.
Let's do this. So
Almost
let's do
there.
this. Hang on a second, Lavelle and Mark. Why don't we add this to the July meeting? Because this is a bigger endeavor than just trying to talk about it now in the outreach part of it. So how about we make a note, and John, if you can remind me to our outreach part of the agenda for July, if we can add Mark's idea to that, so that we can have a more robust conversation that's dedicated just to that, and we're not just going into it blind. We have a month to think about it, because I think there are a lot of tentacles to this, which I think is Lavelle's point. If that works for you, Mark and Lavelle, I think let's hear from Lucas, and we'll.
No problem on this end.
Thank you, Lucas.
Yeah, so I was just gonna speak kind of to, so what I know about like safety and compliance is I think it's like the 4 E's, education, enforcement, engineering, and emergency response. So I think kind of in like this situation with people on the tracks, I think education is kind of the main thing that could easily be implemented. I know when we went and visited the Transit Museum up in New York City this past summer, there was actually a section that was dedicated to like videos and advertisements in the museum that was basically advocating for like safety around the tracks, safety near railroads. So I think that finding a way to either put more signage up or maybe have some different messages on social media would be like a good reminder for people. Because I've witnessed many people just drop their phones, jump down on the tracks, jump back up like it's no issue. But I think that when you kind of take that step back and you kind of see how bad it actually can be getting down there on the tracks, I think the education aspect is something that we could kind of easily implement, and that WMATA could easily implement to kind of just remind people. I think that it really just comes down to people feel confident that they can get down on the tracks and get back up safely. But in the end, I think that it comes back to that education piece. So,
Would you
Well,
agree
years
with
ago,
the enforcement
it was
element of it?
education. You were not able to stand beyond a certain line on the platform. And, that broke down, and, now people stand on the lights, and now people hang off, 1 foot, they jump down. So, maybe it would be interesting to go back and to look at that original intent. Because for, probably a decade after the system opened, that was the norm. People did not stand on that area. Now, over the years, they changed the design of the platform, so it's kind of hard to explain, what that area was. But before, it was basically a line you didn't cross. And if you did, you heard from the station manager on the microphone, on the audio system.
And yeah, we still have the trains that beep at people sometimes too. You can see. So okay, thank you, Lucas. I think the education part's really helpful with that. My view, I think, is there's the education and the enforcement part of it, because if someone is nefarious, or just doing, the education's gonna be like whatever, right? So I almost think there needs to be 2 prongs to that one. But thank you everybody for coming on that one. Let's let's move on to the other thing on the list because this is another timely one. So the Orange Line, Silver Line shuttle bus during the rail work in Virginia. So based on my personal experience and speaking to numerous riders and overhearing numerous riders just the last few days, the shuttle bus process, as we probably all know so far, has not been smooth. So they have a shuttle bus that goes from Ballston to either Vienna or McLean to kind of bridge that gap. And they say it's supposed to be a quick 5-minute get on the bus. That's kind of the perception. Buses every 5 minutes and get between McLean and Ballston on the Silver Line. By many accounts, it adds an hour to an hour and a half extra to the commute. It took me over 2 hours to get home the other day when normally it would take me less than an hour. Guy today was telling me 2.5 hours. This is particularly in the afternoon. We got the smoke issue going on right now. People are standing in line halfway around the block. Ramada workers were good at the train stations of directing people to where to go from the train to find the shuttles. So that was a good thing. But then again, at Ballston, the line wraps halfway around the block. There's confusion on whether that line leads to buses going to McLean or Vienna. The shuttle buses are congested because that part of Ballston is just super trafficy at that time. And when it gets to, on the way between McLean, and the road is just so blocked up. Oh, when you get to McLean, you think you get right to the train station. The road is so blocked up with other buses and cars and other things that the shuttle bus which is a big giant charter bus. It stops way down the street, and this matters. Again, my observation talking to people is because I'm not an expert on access issues like Pat is, but I observed people with mobility issues struggling to navigate off the bus and onto the sidewalk. The shuttle buses on these charters were very narrow steps, and I observed one gentleman with a cane attempting to depart the bus. And just so I know by the time our report gets to the board later this month, a lot of this might be moot for this, at least for the Silver Line part of it. But I recommend that WMATA, the staff, whoever, they conduct a thorough after-action review of the shuttle bus process to avoid these issues when we need them moving forward. I also suggest looking at bolstering. Maybe, I don't know if they can do it now or not, but if they can, I know they're trying, because I know today they announced kind of some measures to kind of alleviate some of the problems at McLean and Ballston. But I think they should look at bolstering other public transit alternatives so that to alleviate the burden on the jammed up shuttles, because Ballston, you can only do so much. It is a traffic nightmare over there. For example, one alternative that's catching on with riders from kind of the new Silver Line area is to take what's called the 599 Fairfax connector from Reston Station to the Pentagon. And then this is what I do. And then after my debacle with the shuttles, this is what I started doing. I go to the Pentagon and hop on the Yellow Line train to Archives, and I go to work. Those buses are really limited in frequency, and they're more expensive than rail. I think it's $8 for a one-way trip on the bus. So perhaps WMATA can arrange for additional buses at the select Silver Line stations like Wheelie or Vienna or Ashburn that can fill in some of the gaps from the existing bus lines. Because, like, for example, the Pentagon bus, the 599 goes at 7:20 in the morning, then it goes 8 o'clock. So what about in between that? And that might encourage people to still take public transportation, but avoid kind of this congestion at the shuttle. So that's kind of my proposal on that one. And then also one thing is Jose Del Cid, who's not here. He emailed me today to add, and I told him that I would include him. And Mark, I see your hand, that he's seen some conflicting images or closures in Virginia. He knows WMATA has met the need in the past, so this might not be a concern. So basically, Jose is raising the long queues for the buses as well. And he's saying it's inconsistent for a lot of riders. He says others know while the lines are long, the shuttle buses arrive quickly. He thinks the RAC might benefit from an update prior to when the green line and red line lines outages occur, and what the strategies are for those, as staff did for the Yellow Line bridge outage. So that was from Jose. So Mark, your hand is up, and then we'll go to Pat.
I see this as a congestion pricing model. Cities all around the world have congestion pricing for drivers. I mean, basically the fare system of WMATA is congestion pricing. So maybe it would make sense, instead of creating a new budget line for expenditures, to incentivize riders to say between 7 and 7:45, you save 50 cents.
No, I think that's kind of what I was talking about too, the expense part. That is definitely in my notes. I think it's a wider thing beyond the congestion, but I think incentivize. But are you incentivizing them to take the alternatives, right? That are still public transportation? Because I mean, if you're incentivizing people to,
if there's no associated expenditure, I mean, if WMATA has to spend money to have extra shuttle buses, that's really not an incentive. We want the rider to take an action within the current framework. That would be the incentive. So, knocking $1 off is more responsible from a budgetary standpoint than trying to allocate another $50,000 a week or a month.
It sounds like you're saying money for time, because I mean, if it's going to be an headache of an hour and a half extra on your commute to save an extra $1, I don't know. As someone who stood in that line, but I mean,
that's an idea. It's not expensive to try.
So
That's
I think
Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, sorry for jumping in. My virtual hand's not working very well. I would recommend that when you come to do your report in June, that you guys bring the concerns about the wait times and bring those to the board. The board can direct the general manager. Then it's their purview to direct the general manager to potentially take an action to rethink it. In the meantime, John, I'm wondering if I could send a note, or you could send a note in the interim, given that it's a real-time issue. I wonder, John, if that wouldn't be helpful. So before waiting until the RAC report on the 22nd, I don't know what you all think about that.
I disagree.
Right. That was my ask.
Yeah. I mean,
Raina?
One of the first comments that was made tonight was I should not make a recommendation to staff. So, I mean, if you want to act as RAC, then we need to have the entire committee weigh in on decisions, as opposed to instructing one staff person to relay a message.
I'm sorry.
It's not widely debated.
I'm not a RAC member. I'm a board member. I'm proposing to you guys that I would be willing to take that action in the interim before you get to the 22nd.
Brian, let's hear from Patrick, and then I'll address that. But yes.
No, I wanted copies of all these notes, because I want to, Michael, thank you first. This is the first I've heard of it, and this is important. So it's something where you need to act quickly. Brian, I thank you so much for your position on the board to be able to take this. Any supporting documents that you guys want to share with us, I'd be happy to take to AAC, because I want to be able to raise this at our next meeting too. So, and I agree with you. I think that raising this on the 22nd would be good. Thank you. I didn't know when the board meeting was, so I appreciate that, Bryna. And I think having joint recommendations from RAC and AAC going forward to the board, I think is pretty powerful stuff. So I'd like to make sure we're on the same page, Michael.
Patrick, I'll email you this week to get on the page for the report. In the short term, because this again is real time, this is an issue that's affecting many of our riders in Virginia.
Right.
People with accessibility issues, as well as just people that don't. So Bryna, to your point, I know Mark brought up kind of a process question, but you heard kind of the recommendations that we had for the short term, and also the concerns, at least to raise the concern from the RAC officially through you as the board member. If the rest of the RAC, does anybody have any objections to the RAC kind of agreeing to ask Bryna to do this on our behalf? I think it's a good idea. Hearing none, Bryna, if you're good with that, the RAC as a whole, on behalf of the RAC, we appreciate you conveying what was discussed tonight regarding this shuttle bus issue. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it.
Also the AAC, even though I haven't asked them. If
And the
I take a hit
AAC.
from them and the AAC, include us on that too, Brenna. Got
We got
people with
AAC still
disabilities,
moving.
yeah.
All right,
that,
But I do
thanks,
think
guys.
that, I do think, Pat, kind of we talked about before the Writer Summit, I think the more joint voices for some of these things, I think it definitely is more powerful.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So, okay, so let's move on. So I think we're going on to new announcements, new business. Here's one. Our next meeting is scheduled for July 5th. That's a horrible date. We have 2 minutes left in the meeting, which is why I'm talking quicker now. And while I understand that we're never going to get a perfect attendance, especially during the summer, I propose we move the July meeting to July 12th. Again, note for everybody that we don't have a meeting in August. That's how it is every year. So I'm going to put it up to a vote. Does everybody want to move our meeting to July 12th? Does anybody want to second that?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Good. All right, that was efficient. Thank you. I had one other issue for a new business. I'm going to raise it in the next meeting. John, you'll be happy to know that's kind of where I want to talk a little bit about the IT stuff. We will wait until we can speak to the IT person. I do have some serious concerns, including, we can get into it next month, regarding that report. So you have the report that I'm focused on for that one. So we'll bring it up for new business next time and be sure to get to it. And that is all I have. Before we adjourn, does anybody have anything they want to add, or are we good to go?
Yeah, it would be helpful if we had like committee reports to review to cut down on the back and forth, and move with a consent agenda instead of, hearing about something, for the first time and being asked to vote in favor of it.
No, you're absolutely right on that one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you for new things that I know we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you a heads up, talk about it, and that's where I was trying to start that trend now. Kind of like, this might be a bad example, but the annual report committee one, like we're not going to do the vote on it now, but think about it for next time. Whether you even want to continue the annual report. But yeah, I think you're right. Some of the outreach stuff that we talked about, like the people on the tracks, that's stuff that we're kind of gathering as we hear about it. But so what I recommend for the RAC members is, as you come up with kind of this outreach from your individual, outreach during the month for the outreach portion of the agenda, just send me and what your thoughts are, what you want to talk about. And then kind of like Mahalia did for me, and what I'll do instead of just bringing it up for the first time now is I'll give you a heads up so you can kind of consider, like, okay, we're going to talk about people jumping on the tracks. So I think, Mark, thank you. That is definitely helpful for efficiency. Brian, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll try to be quick. Just 2 quick updates. First is we opened the grand opening of the Potomac Yard Station. So that was very exciting. I know John and Bryna and Pat and myself were all there. It was a great event, and it was absolutely lovely to celebrate with everyone that station, which should spur some development. The second thing is tomorrow is, John, I believe, Finance and Capital. And so if you have some time, go on YouTube and watch that committee meeting, and you can find all committee meetings, and the general board meetings are all streamed on Metro Forward's YouTube station, so you can check in and see what the board is doing in real time.
Thanks. You very much, Brian. I see John's hand was up, and then I'm going to move to adjourn because we're 2 minutes past my deadline. So John, go ahead.
Sure, I will. I'll keep it brief. One, I know that several of you visited the pop-up, the railcar pop-up at Gallery Place, and Lynn Bowersox, who's our Vice President of Rail Transformation, said she appreciated everyone's feedback, and will be sharing sort of the feedback that they collected with the board on the 22nd of this month. So I'll make sure to share that information with you as soon as we have it, so you all can see sort of the end game of something that Lynn has been talking to you all about for the past couple months.
I did have a chance to visit, and it was not only informative, it was entertaining, and I felt that the staff that was present did an exceptional job being the face of Metro for that time.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I think by all accounts, Mark, what you said is kind of unanimous of that was definitely helpful. So, okay, I want to thank everybody. I think this was one of the more spirited conversations on various things we've had in a while. I think it was great for substance and process. So thanks to everybody for everything. I move that we adjourn this meeting. Do I have a second?
I don't think you need a second for adjournment, but that I'll
All right.
second.
Anybody not want to adjourn?
I want to say thanks to all of you for really, I mean, this is why we have the RAC, and this is why each of you are a member. So thank you very much.
And thanks to you, Bryna, as well for your help and your passing on, being willing to pass on some more real-time issues. So hearing no issues or anything, I call this meeting adjourned. Thank you so much, everybody.